So the fifth section of the CCMA interview continues our discussion on the one-sidedness of the employment relationship, and I did discuss largely the majority of what Mr. Peko Molefe said in my commentary of the last section. But one thing that he does mention I'd like to touch up on is he mentions that employers need to be better empowered and equipped to better handle conflict resolutions with their employees, which is something that which is necessary from his perspective, stating that, look, the workplace cannot be a free for all. There has to be order, and his assumption, as I understand it, would be that that order has to be hierarchical in the way that it is. So I'm not against hierarchies, but I'm against the unjust establishment of hierarchies. And I feel that the hierarchy between an employee and an employer is unjust because it is established off of exploitation. It is basically taking advantage of a power differential, as I've already stipulated. So the employee is when they come to the table to establish this relationship in the job interview, they are at a disadvantage, and that is a problem. He does mention that, look, everyone has rights, but those rights are also, everyone has rights granted by the Constitution, but those same rights are limited by the Constitution, so that we can all respect one another and all sort of balance each other out. And I agree with that in spirit. I mean, the Constitution is meant to be the God document, basically, of the country, right? And I'm saying that that is not reflected in the employment relationship and in the manner in which the employee is handled both by the employer and the state, meaning and the laws around employment. We then moved on to discuss employer engagement and some of the benefits that employers offer employees to assure their increased loyalty and performance on the job. And as you heard, my problem with a lot of these benefits that employers offer employees is that they don't necessarily offer benefits to employees. They're not actually benefits to employees. They are taking employees' power in doing things for themselves so that they could control the employees. It's similar to what you see in let's say in how the country is currently governed. If you look at some of the bylaws in the municipal areas, there's a pothole on your street. You are not allowed to fix it yourself. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but as I understand it, it's illegal for you to fix that pothole. You have to call people that are licensed by the municipality or employed by the municipality or the municipality itself to fix the pothole. Now, how does that serve the people in that neighborhood or on that street? They should have the power to take care of themselves. And, I'm just using that as an example. That's another whole issue. But I'm using that as an example, right? Instead of offering daycare at your cost at the workplace, why not pay me more to take care of my own daycare? Why not pay me more to pay my own insurance? Instead of tying that benefit, as you call it, or as it is called, to the workplace. So as long as you work for me, you can then do this for yourself. This is a problem. So it means for as long as you work for me, you're a person. If you don't work for me, you're not a person. You shouldn't be allowed to make your own decisions. And it really takes away power from the employee in deciding how to spend their own money. No, if you're going to work here, you're going to have insurance. And this is how the insurance works. Now, Mr. Peko Molefe later on does mention that this is a risk management tool on behalf of the employer. which I think is sensible, right? He mentioned, the contract and what else did he write on this? Code of conducts and so on. Risk management tools, which, I'm not going to argue against risk management. I totally agree with it. You have to manage risk in whatever you do. You have to mitigate, instances of bad outcomes. So, but what I'm saying is, if you consider the relationship between the employee and the employer, how much risk of the employer is managed relative to the risk of the employee, right? And I feel that the risk of the employee is largely negated. And that's what I was talking about here. To say that if an employee sits down in a job interview with a potential employer, the reason they're doing that is because they have their own risks they want to mitigate that are not necessarily job related. They want to mitigate, should someone pass away at home, they need to have the funds to service that outcome. Pay for funerals, or pay for weddings, or pay for a child, and so on and so forth. So they have their own mission that they bring to the table that they want to accomplish. And risk mitigation, when it comes to the employment relationship, does not take those things into consideration. And employee engagement in offering those things at the workplace does not actually do that to manage that risk, to help the employee. No, we're doing this to help you. No, we're doing this to control you, so that these benefits that you get are benefits that are related to the job. And in most cases, these are actually counted towards the cost to company. So they usually even come at the employee's cost. It's just that the only difference is that the employer decides how that money that should be going to the employee is spent on these things, which for me is problematic. I should decide if I want insurance, right? If I do a job, we can have it in the job contract where I say, look, I decide not to have insurance, so that if something should happen, then you as the employer are not liable. I decided not to have insurance because I wanted to keep more of the money, or I wanted to keep that money, or I wanted to use the money for something else. I should have that purview. And the employer should then have the purview to say, okay, look, if you want to have your own insurance or you don't want to have insurance, then I don't want you to work for me. That's fine, that's fair, right? But my problem is the employee is expected to not have these things. You're expected to. And in most cases, you are censored even beyond such things. The moment you show a certain level of assertiveness, you get pushed aside to say, look, I don't want to work with you because you're not acting like a slave. And that's a problem for me. So, yeah, these benefits, I just believe that employees are capable of taking care of themselves. They are adults. They don't need to be mothered by employers, right? These benefits are great, right, if they come at the cost of the employer, because the employer uses benefits to compete against other employers in attracting talent. So it shouldn't be to the cost of the employee at all. If you want to offer daycare, but don't say it is a cost to company to the employment relationship you have with the specific employee, right? Pay the employee what they feel they deserve, and you incur the cost of attracting talent. You do that yourself. He mentioned the housing allowance, which extends to the house, amongst other things that I just can't remember. But he was talking about how these things are meant to help the employee also, so the employee is not stressed out. But in the long term, that's in the short term, but in the long term, it's actually a bad deal for the employee, in my opinion. In my opinion, generally speaking, I'm generalizing, right? But for the average citizen, for the average employee, it's a bad deal, because the average citizen gets a standardized employment contract, right? It's only above a certain either skill level or earning threshold or so on and so forth, where someone has more voice in the drafting of the employment contract. But the average citizen, the average employee, no. They're considered, replaced. We then moved on to discuss NEDLAC's Code of Good Practice. specifically around this distinction between the employee and the independent contractor, which if you listen to, I mean, you did hopefully, listen to my argument, is that, the distinction is arbitrary. It's unnecessary, and it's exploitative on the side of the employee, right? But basically my point was there is that the only thing that seemed closest to making sense in terms of justifying this distinction is the issue of liability, where you say, look, if you have an independent contractor working for you as per the contract that you signed with them, if they mess up on the job, they are liable. They can be sued. They then are liable to pay for whatever will fix the situation. Whereas if you have an employee working for you, the employee is considered to be you. So whatever the employee messes up, you're liable. Okay. So I think that makes most sense, even though I still don't think it goes far enough to justify it. And the reason being that the employee also is liable, just in a different way. They're not liable in a civil way in terms of, liable to pay, financially. That's arguable because there are cases where employers make employees pay for whatever they mess up by deducting from their salary. So there's that, right? They can pay by losing their job, which is a financial loss anyway, because you're losing your salary. So, I mean, really, an employee is an independent contractor. It's just they differentiate between the two as part of a legalese, linguistic gymnastic type thing that justifies treating employees like slaves and not giving them voices in the job interview and just treating them like desperate minions. One thing that was interesting is that he said, should an employee not be happy with the relationship they have with the employer having designated them an independent contractor, they can call the CCMA to test the nature of the relationship and make a decision on that. Right? And for me, I found this interesting because it harked back to why isn't the state involved in the job interview? Aside from issues of gender equity, equity issues or diversity issues, equity issues, and harassment issues. Fair enough. They're involved in that way in terms of the laws do regulate, in terms of the employee being able to complain after the fact. But I'm talking about the state being involved via legislation that empowers the employee to better resist said power abuse during the job interview, right? So laws that empower or protect the employee or empower the employee to be able to go to an interview and literally say, I'm bringing my parents with. My parents are going to sit with me in the job interview. Or my family is going to sit with me in the job interview. Or I'm going to bring someone specific who's going to advise me on the value that you're presenting relative to the value that I'm presenting, right? Instead of the employee being forced, by default to come to an interview alone against a panel of people, to negotiate with a panel of people. So this is, so it harks back to that. I think state involvement should be legislative, but I think, again, that should be driven from the ground up rather than because it won't be driven from the top up, which means employees need to have a voice. They need to take and create a space, take space in the debate, occupy that space forcefully, not forcefully in terms of violence, but forcefully in terms of just being a force to be reckoned with, and become a social partner. Employees as a class need to become a social partner, and they're not. Exactly how they should do that, again, is the solution, and you'd have to read the article. It's only $20, $19.99. So go to my website. Link is in the description, and see what you think about that. We then go on. Still discussing. We're still sticking to the topic, discussing a restriction on employees. This is again the distinction between employees and independent contractors. You know, I question why employees are not allowed to employ other people. If you, and he, I mean, Mr. Pekumulife does address it, say, look, when you employ an employee, you want that specific individual to do what it is that you're tasking them to do. You don't want anyone else to do that. But when you hire an independent contractor, which is a business, right? You don't mind whoever they send that works for them to do whatever it is. So just to give an example, you want to hire me to do, to mow the lawn. Okay, fair enough. You want to hire me to mow the lawn. I have to mow the lawn myself. I can't ask someone else to mow the lawn on my behalf and I'm going to give them half of what you're going to pay me. I'm not allowed to do that. But if you hire a gardening company, right, as an independent contractor to mow your lawn, you don't care who mows the lawn, which individual mows the lawn, as long as it's that company. To me, that seems a little, I don't know, unnecessary. Why does it make a difference to you then? Because either way, you have the same amount of control. If you don't like a specific individual from an independent contractor, you can sack the independent contractor. You can complain to the independent contractor. And the independent contractor can then, following their own rules of conduct, because they're an employer, deal with that employee. You can do the same with if you hired an individual who then hired another individual. You can complain to the individual you hired, the one you control. So the difference between an employee and an independent contractor, again, full-time, he spoke about using the CCMA as an example, saying full-time, part-time can be used as a distinction, which I don't think it can. There are employees and there are full, because look, if you hire a independent contractor to come and work on whatever, on your premises, right, at times that are stipulated in the contract, why is that not similar to hiring an employee part-time, where you have times when they can come in and do their job? I mean, it's just a timing issue, in my opinion. It's a timing issue. Right? So if an independent contractor working for you, as stipulated by the contract, is full-time, if you say they only come in 1 hour a day, or 1 hour every other day to do a specific task, they come in 1 hour. According to the contract, they're full-time because they occupy the full-time of their contract, in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, guys, but I'm just saying some of these things are so, unnecessary, man. It's just linguistics. It's English to confuse people and to make jobs unnecessarily complicated so people seem more smart than they are. Right, in my opinion. Okay, so, taking a second job. Why can't an employee take a second job? If they can employ someone else, then they can literally take another job while that person they hired, they're going to share their salary with, does their job. What's the problem? What is the problem? So these things are, and now, why? The reason, and this is not the way I see it, it's also part of the reason why, the inequality is such a part of the market. I mean, inequality is not a result of the market. It's an aspect of the market. It's a part of the market. It's necessary for the market to value labor and to keep the value of labor manageable. I mean, in my opinion, higher unemployment benefits employers to a certain level, of course, to a limit, right? But it does benefit them because it lowers the cost of labor, since there's more desperation and more demand for employment. So, I just feel like a lot of this is conceptual gymnastics, which doesn't serve the employee at all. And I think the problem is that employees, again, as a class, they're not involved in formulating these concepts. We need to be involved. And again, our involvement, our lack of involvement, is the fault of the state and employees and other social partners, but it's not their responsibility. It's employees and hence citizens' responsibility to get involved. We can't really blame them. It's their fault. I mean, it serves them, and they undertake they perform certain actions to ensure that they remain in an advantageous position. But you know, it serves them, so why blame them? You shouldn't blame someone for doing something that benefits them. Rather, empower yourself. And I don't mean yourself as an injury. I'm speaking to employees as a class, all of us. And I'm saying rather we empower ourselves to be part of that conversation, to be part of these debates, so that we can represent our side to the story, or our side of the market, or our perspective on the market, or our experience of the market. All right.